Oh, I think everyone's gone back to sleep. Anyone at all?
Oh, we got 3 hands up, so that's good. So I think Sabur is in first. I will allow to talk. Sabur, are you there?
Yep. Hi, everyone.
Hello. Where are you calling in from?
From Victoria, Melbourne.
Very good. Yes, of course. Now let's find your site. Now, Marissa, I don't know if you're grab that one, or I can find it.
Grabbing it now. Give me 1 second to paste that in. All right. Can you see that?
Yeah. Hang on, I got 2 there.
Yeah. Sorry, I've just copied that over.
So which one are we going to look at, Sabur? The Manx Road one?
Yep. Actually, what I did, because right now in Victoria for in road safety, we are doing network safety planning for road safety Victoria RSV.
Yeah.
And so we have both. Actually, I have both rural and metro most dangerous intersection selected for this assignment. So yeah, up to you.
Well, let's do the rural one. And I'm going to share my screen because I've brought it up so we can have a look at it. So hopefully that's working.
Yep, that's all good.
Okay, well, let's have a look at this this intersection. Now, so tell me tell us a little bit about this. So you're looking at most dangerous intersections in Victoria?
Yeah, actually, based on the FSI for the number of fatal and serious injuries from 2015 to end of 2021 for 7 years, this intersection has the maximum number of FSIs for that period of time. So I thought that might be a good idea to have a look, and see what's wrong.
Yes. Yeah. Okay. So then going through the methodology that we were categorizing things by what influences exposure, what influences likelihood, what influences severity. So let's start with exposure. What's influencing the exposure risk at this site, or the exposure which is a contributing factor to risk at this site?
Oh yeah, I checked actually the AADT for this site, the number of the vehicles traveling through this intersection is not that much high, but something I can actually. Can you see what that was? Because I'm trying to bring it up. I put the AADT in my assignment.
Oh, okay. Marissa might be able to have a look there and see if there was a number in there. But was this the AADT on the main road, or you had it for side roads as well?
Oh no, just for the main road.
Yeah. Okay.
Sorry, Ken. What am I looking for exactly?
Just in the assignment, in the exposure, is there a number like 5,000 or 4,000 or something around that?
Of vehicles per day?
Yeah.
We've got. Sorry, you saying something, Sabur?
Yeah, it's 1,400.
1,000
per day. Yep.
Okay. Yeah. So you're right. Not a high volume. Okay, that's interesting. So you're right though. That is the exposure really. That, and then the number coming out of these side roads. You sort of add those up. That's your exposure to crashes. The number of vehicles exposed. Of course, there would be an exposure for pedestrians, which would likely be low in a rural location like this, but you might occasionally get a pedestrian. Cyclists, maybe occasionally. Motorcyclists would certainly make up some of that 1,400 or whatever it was. So that's sort of exposure, really. Good. Okay. what about things that influence the likelihood of crash? What did you say on that?
Yeah, for the likelihood, actually, it's not a signalized intersection, so that's the first thing that comes into mind. And what we can see on the roads, intersecting roads, minimal to actually no shoulder, or both. Yeah, that's a very what we can see, and yeah. So I think these are the main two things, and also yeah, that's it. The main two things I can say, that no shoulder or minimal, and not signalized.
Yeah, yeah. So certainly intersection control is a big likelihood factor, as you say. So it's passively controlled give way signs. That means people are making their own choices, when to go, when not to go. And that certainly influences the chance of a crash, exactly the likelihood. So that's one. Then you're right, it's a fairly constrained environment at this location, isn't it? We've got this structure over here, which is going to cause some challenges that close to the intersection. You'd look at also things like potentially, sight distances are a likelihood factor. Are they being influenced? Are they appropriate? Obviously, you need to sort of get out on site to try and gather some of this understanding. But those are some big ones. You'd also look in there at things like signs, the speed of vehicles, the line marking. Interesting, just in the street view, seeing them sort of overtaking and the like. So there's a bit going on at this location. So yeah, they're the likelihood. They're some of the likelihood factors, and you could list quite a lot of them, but that wasn't part of this. I was just getting that. So well done. What about severity? What's influencing the severity of crashes?
Yep. So in terms of severity, we have got many fixed unshielded hazards. Other from some, we can see the barriers, but for actually where we do not have barriers in place, we can see fixed unshielded hazards. And also the speed in this area, speed zone is 80. So I think the approaching speed is a little bit high for this intersection. So yeah, I think in terms of severity, if we want to reduce the severity of the fatal or serious crashes, we need to shield or remove the hazard and reduce the speed as well.
Good. Okay. So interstate system assessment, yeah. The presence of, this is an interesting little one, the presence of this power pole close to the road as it is, the fact that it is close to the road is the likelihood part of it. The fact that it's a rigid pole is the severity part of it, which you're right on there. So if it was some sort of slip-based pole or something like that, the severity would be less, but the chance of hitting it's still the same. And you're right, like there's fixed hazards close to this intersection. That one's particularly close, isn't it? Which is a bit of a challenge. You've got the bridge structure to deal with again from a severity sense, which is going to be a harder impact. I'm not sure how that transitions to that. It's not ideal, but they're not horrible. You've got a weird short radius barrier thing going on here. So you're right, like leaving the road is a crash. When you hit something, how rigid that is going to influence the severity of it, or how much time and distance you have to wash off that energy. Then the speed you talked about, and speed is going to be a big influencing factor across not just the severity of all of those crashes, which it will absolutely, like it's a massive influencer. It'll also influence the likelihood of crashes a bit as well. So lower speeds, getting these bullet vehicles coming through at a lower speed means that there will be less crashes, and the ones that still do occur will be of less severity. Okay, so really, I mean, good assessment there. You've done very well. You're nicely categorizing things. What did you come up with ideas on how you might influence the exposure to crashes? Did you have any ideas? It's always a hard one to do, but did you come up with any ideas?
Yeah, actually, I was thinking about left in, left out treatment or channelized, actually, maybe adding a channelized left treatment to this intersection.
Yep.
So I'm not sure, yeah, if what I put was channelized left turn treatment, but the feedback I got was that it's not correct, and left in, left out might be a treatment. So yeah, I'm not sure.
Yeah, so channelized left, yeah, I assume you'd be talking into here, is it?
Yeah, yes.
So the only spot you've really got space, unless you
Yes.
did massive works. So that's not actually an exposure change. That would influence the likelihood of crashes. And the reason for that is that we still have the same number of vehicles navigating through this intersection. They're just less likely to crash because it's a more formalized, channelized, and they're not weaving around. You're not having one that slows down to turn and the other one sort of goes around it, or rear end possibility, and all of those sort of things. So
can I ask a question?
Yeah.
This way we separate certain flows of traffic. So when we separate them,
yep.
It means we are actually minimizing somehow the number of the vehicles that might conflict. So when reducing the number of the conflicts, I thought it might be considered as reducing the exposure. That was the reason.
Yeah, and I can understand that way of thinking. So the only way that you could talk about that as reducing exposure would be to do some sort of like grid of this whole intersection and do a safe system assessment on that left turn movement only, then a safe system assessment on that turn movement. But that's not how we do safe system assessments. We do it for the whole intersection.
I see. Yeah.
As one assessment. And so you've still got all of those vehicles going through. Yep. So actually, even left in, left out, we talk about that as a likelihood reducing factor, unless it actually changes the number of vehicles that are going through the intersection. So they, divert around to other intersections. Always with exposure changes and things, we might reduce the number of vehicles going through an intersection, but we always got to think about where we're transferring them. And if we're just transferring them to another dangerous location, it's probably not overall, we're not influencing exposure, but that's generally how to think about it. So in a safe system assessment, really take exposure and in your mind, just replace it with volume. Or number of vehicles, number of people, number of cyclists. That's the way to think about it. I don't know. They use the term exposure. I can understand why, but it does tend to create a little bit of confusion in that sense. For one particular crash type, you might be able to argue you've altered the exposure, but we're generally thinking, as I say, about the whole intersection.
Okay, thanks.
So what about things that could influence the likelihood of crashes?
Signalization. That would be easiest, yeah. That was mine, yeah. But in terms of implementation, that would be expensive, I think.
Yeah, we'll put that to the side. Implementation challenges, but you're right. Like signalizing is very much a likelihood factor. It's all about the likelihood of crashes when you signalize. So yes, that certainly would reduce the likelihood of crashes. Absolutely. What about the severity of crashes? Do you have any ideas to reduce the severity of crashes?
Yeah, actually, speed reduction, that would be the cheapest one, to change the speed zone from 80 to 60, maybe. Yep. And also barrier installation.
So some more barriers, trying to protect road users from hitting those remaining point source hazards would reduce the severity of crashes. So yeah, that's right. Okay, so great categorization and well worked through. So, I mean, on an intersection like this, yeah, it is that straight bullet vehicle speed that is causing us the severity damage. It obviously used to be a direct crossroad here, and what they did was a staggered T. So at one point in time, they were having crash problems here, no doubt, and they said, okay, let's offset this. So we shifted over here. Now that's a fairly good treatment because you eliminate the see-through effect. So you significantly reduce the likelihood of crashes. But as you can see from this location with the crash history that's there, it doesn't eliminate death and serious injury. And as your volume of vehicles coming out of the side roads increase, we see bullet vehicle speed causing us challenges again. So without knowing, you don't know the side road volumes, do you?
Oh, no, we don't have it right now.
Yeah, I dare say the side road volumes have picked up a bit, and that's causing a fair bit of the exposure challenge. Excuse me, because yeah, why would this site stand out above others? Well, because there's plenty of these sorts of intersections. I'm just going to sort of pan out and say, well, you know, okay, that's a T intersection, but you know, why not that one? Okay, why isn't that one performing as badly as that one? This one's even got the straight through see-through effect. That would be pretty bad. This one, I guess, wouldn't be performing that well either. However, I think the difference between that one and that one and the other one will be mainly driven by the volume of vehicles on the road here. Yes, you've got some individual characteristics of each site that are going to influence. But if the two sites had the same volume, I'd actually predict this one would perform a little bit worse because of that potentially that see-through effect there that you can see that somebody might just overshoot that. It's got really horrible sight distance here, and they've got the stop signs, yes, because the sight distance constraints. But really, volume and side road vehicle numbers, and then the speed through there is going to be the big influencing factor there. So, what would I suggest at this location? Well, first of all, a roundabout, compact roundabout. Now you're going to have to buy up some land and you have to remove services, and it's not going to be a cheap exercise, but that will get you to a point of virtually eliminating death and serious injury at this location. Now, it's going to be expensive, obviously, but then I think side road activated speeds would be a good one, and it sounds like you're looking at that. And yeah, these sorts of intersections, the challenge we've got is that, yeah, bullet vehicle speeds. He's got to start to look at things to address that. There's, yeah, as you say, there's lots of little tweaks that can be done. Some more barrier system to minimize the severity of some of these incidents. The transition to the bridges can be improved in terms of barrier systems. It's a fairly short stagger. I mean, it's staggered the correct way. You don't want to stagger your T intersections the other way. That causes more trouble because vehicles come out and they prop. So I'm saying like you can see, this is a right left. If you have it as a left right, yeah, the vehicle sort of comes out and then they sort of prop half in the lane. And it's an awkward one because they'll sort of go and then they stop and you've got vehicles coming in and you get a lot of turbulence and conflict going on if you do that. This way, they've got to wait for their gap completely, but then they go out and then they sorry, they go out and then they come in, which works works all right. But as you can see, they're still making judgment calls on going through there and being struck. So we categorize intersection crashes into two. One is overshoot and one is restart. And these will be restart crashes. So these will be restart crashes in the sense that people aren't approaching from Dalmore Road anymore and thinking that their priority continues and you know, braking late and skidding into the intersection and overshooting the intersection. No, they know they've got to stop. They're there. There's volume of traffic coming. They're making a bad call and being struck. So we've got to slow down these side road vehicles, and yeah, or even potentially start to control it. So signals would do a decent job of this, but we'd still retain that high speed crash potential. So if we were going to signalize, I'd be suggesting looking for ways to reduce speeds in association with the traffic signals as well. But yeah, signals would be a bit out of place in an environment like this. Yeah, it's a good site to look at. So they've done, I think they've done rumble strips on the approach to try to wake people up to the fact that there's an intersection. They, to a degree, have lost a bit of their effectiveness because it's not a see-through effect crash type overshoot anymore. They would have been really effective as they would be over here where they've got them, because you're trying to wake people up and say, hey, intersection coming up, you got to do something. You're going to have to stop. You're going to have to give way. They're trying to tell people you have to give way. Over here, the fact that they're not looking at their road going straight through is going to be a pretty great clue to them back here that their road doesn't continue and that they are going to have to give way. They're going to be looking straight at those hazard boards, and that should help a bit. So you can see them sort of queuing up. Yeah, so thank you for sharing that one. It's a really good example. So Marissa, prize there, I think, for that wonderful contribution.
Thank you. And you're right about the other intersection as well. We have 6 FSI crashes for the other one that you mentioned. Yeah, you're right.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know the area, but certainly, I mean, we could probably just continue on this road and find some other crossroads, and any that have reasonable sized side road volumes are going to have that. Good. Okay. Thank you. That was excellent. We'll drop you off and see if we had somebody else. I think I'm happy to do this. I think there's a lot of learning to be had from just talking these through. So I'll stop sharing my screen there. Who else do we have? Cohen. I'll allow Cohen to talk. G'day, Cohen. Hello.
Can you hear me?
Yes, got you. How are you?
Yeah, good. How are you?
Good. Where are you calling in from?
Brisbane.
Lovely Brisbane. Now, Marissa, are you able to grab Cohen's side?
Yep, I'm grabbing it right now. And you should see it pop up now. Can you see that, Ken? Great.
I think there might have been a couple of questions about that side or comments on that side I haven't seen. I saw some stuff going on in the chat there. So
there are a couple questions. Just in regards to the last site. Can a raised platform be a potential solution, especially along the side road? Will a combination of horizontal and vertical deflection be good?
Yeah, so on that previous one, like, sorry, Cohen, we'll get back to
that's
you.
right.
We're just going to run with this. I'm going to share my screen again. On that, like the addition of raised features on this location aren't really going to do anything for the crashes at this location, because it might do a bit. It might do a little bit in terms of slowing some vehicles down. If they're sort of coming up, they know they've got to stop, but they're going to make, a fast run for it. But I don't feel that that's our issue. Raised portions on Manx Road, though, that would have a reduction in the severity and potentially likelihood of crashes. They have to be done fairly carefully, designed very sort of carefully and tactfully in an environment like this, but it certainly can be done in these environments. But that's the principle's good. We want to slow these vehicles down. Was there other questions there, Marissa?
Yeah, there is a freight depot located at Dulmore Road, north of the intersection. Would the increase in heavy vehicle movement be a factor in high crash stats?
Yeah, so potentially. The number of heavy vehicles through the site would potentially influence. Well, it influences exposure a bit just by sheer numbers. But then, yes, the longer vehicles, they have potentially a little more likelihood of crashes. They take a bit longer to move into the intersection, and they might overhang a bit in different. So there might be a little bit of an increase there. Mind you, heavy vehicle drivers in their nature generally are lower likelihood of crash than passenger vehicle. So it may sort of wash itself out.
We've got one more from. Oh, sorry. Were you finished there, Ken? No.
Yeah, I think I was reading the same one. You were about
okay.
With Jess's comment there. Yeah, we talk about the speed, and we are talking about operating speed, not just the speed limit. So we can certainly achieve lower speeds through all sorts of ways. Speed limits being one of them, but actually speed limits are generally a far less effective one than having some physical infrastructure to influence the operating speed, and far more palatable as well in terms of getting speeds down. So certainly, like, take for example putting a roundabout at this location. Well, the roundabout from a safety perspective is really all about getting the operating speeds of vehicles down at the conflict points. Yes, we get that improved crash angle as well, but that's what we're trying to do, get operating speeds down one way or another at conflict points to within those tolerable thresholds. But let's jump to Brisbane here. Where is it? Is it Brisbane? Yeah.
Yep. It's Brisbane.
That's the site?
Yes, that's right. It's the intersection of Old Cleveland Road and Cavendish Road in Coorparoo.
There you go. Yes, very good. Okay, well, talk us through the it's that intersection, is it? Yeah.
Yeah, that's right.
So talk us through a little bit about the exposure here. What did you know anything about the sort of volume? Or you got general ideas?
I actually don't, because this is a local government road, both the local government roads, and I work for the state authority, but it's near where I live, which is why I decided to do it. But I do know just from experience that both roads have a very high AADT, and that Old Cleveland Road, which is the one running sort of east-west, it is a major bus corridor. It's probably got a bus going down every 30 seconds or something. So
wow, okay,
very busy there. Yeah. So that certainly increases the the exposure there. In addition, you've also got the signalised crossings on each leg for pedestrians.
Yep.
Obviously increases the number of pedestrians that would be using that.
Okay. Yep. So the number of pedestrians, that's right, is the exposure for pedestrians. The signalisation of that crossing is that's I suppose its form of control is a likelihood. I think as you were talking about there, it's about how many pedestrians, and that's probably attracting pedestrians to cross there.
It's also one of the few places you can cross in the area. So
okay. So nicely sort of categorized there with the number of vehicles going through is exposure, the number of pedestrians crossing is exposure. We've got buses going through, which is sort of an exposure and may influence a few other things, but a number of buses, number of motorcyclists, number of cyclists. I wouldn't imagine too many cyclists using this, or do they?
I'm not sure. I see a few, but I don't think it's excessive.
Yeah. Okay. All right. What about likelihood factors? What are things influencing the likelihood of crash here?
Yep. So if you look right there, from back to the earlier view you had, so actually right turns are banned on every approach to this intersection, except that one on the left there. Cars can turn right coming down the hill from there. Yep.
Right. Okay.
So they actually can turn right from that lane there. They start off with a protected right, but then after a while it goes to a filtered right. So obviously that increases the risk of T-bones there. Every other approach doesn't have right turns, so that limits that. The other thing is sort of similar to that previous intersection in Victoria, or some of them, both approaches are really straight, really good sight distance. So that can encourage cars to sort of continue through, probably a bit too fast, or sort of look ahead rather than at the signals and what's happening there. And the other thing is that Cavendish Road approach, which is the one you're on right now, the actual through lanes don't exactly line up perfectly. So there's a slight sort of kink through the intersection, which is difficult to see, but the two center lines don't actually line up perfectly. So as you drive through, you kind of have to move your car off. No, not that one, the north-south approach. They don't line up.
Oh, these ones.
Yeah. It's difficult to see there, but you do have to slightly turn through the intersection there as well.
Okay. Yeah. So they're great likelihood factors you're talking about there. Certainly some of those, sort of see-through effects, which we get a lot at signalized intersections. I mean, they're very often crossroads, see-through. Sort of that lateral shift requirements at any point. You're right; they can be very small, but have an influence on crashes. The ability to make these turns, and certainly filter turns and the like, are big influencing factors in likelihood of crash at these sorts of locations. So these are really good. Really good pickups, and there's lots and lots of stuff that we could go through for pedestrians and cyclists and thinking about likelihood, but you've given me a nice view there. What about severity? What's influencing the severity of crashes?
Well, so Old Cleveland Road, which is the east-west leg, even though it's actually got the higher traffic volume, its speed is 50, but Cavendish Road, the north-south leg, is 60 still.
Right.
I don't know why it has, but so it's actually got a higher speed coming through.
Okay.
And the other one I had, though I don't know if it's severity or likelihood, is that two of the approaches are actually downhill with a bit of a grade. So I think cars probably approach a bit too quickly or struggle to stop in time, and have been quite a few rear ends there.
Yeah,
probably
so
coming from that.
I'd probably categorize that in both. I mean, it's going to influence speed of vehicles approaching, and that influences both likelihood and severity. So that's right. I mean, speed is going to be a big one here. Angle of crashes that can occur is another one. But speed's going to be your big factor there. So what ideas do you have on an intersection like this, very urban environment?
Yep. Well, I mean, if money is no object, ideally grade separate the pedestrian crossings, firstly.
Yep. That would influence the exposure. Absolutely.
Yep. Especially because I think that eastern crossing there, which is the one on your right, is quite busy. That's a major bus stop over there, and you got lots of shops and apartment complexes and everything. So if you could grade separate that, that would be the best one. But that's obviously not the cheapest solution.
Well, that's right. Yeah, but you're right in categorizing. It is exposure.
I would definitely remove that right turn allowed.
Yep.
Still, whether filter or protected, I think it's unsafe and it blocks through traffic. So there's other options in the area. I know people would be upset about it, but there's other options where they can turn right. So at safer intersections where it's actually a fully protected right turn. So rather than a filtered right.
And that's That's right. That's one of our likelihood. So that would address some of the likelihood of crashes at this location. Yep, good.
Yeah. And I think as a severity treatment, I had reducing that speed on Cavendish Road, which is 60 still to 50. I mean, ideally, that would probably require a speed limit review, but I would do it along the length of Cavendish Road, actually, not just through the intersection, but particularly through here. And there's a school actually just behind you on Google Maps, just on the left up the hill.
Yeah.
So I would consider maybe extending the school zone closer to the intersection or even through it.
Yep.
That would probably require a lot of work and community consultation, but to slow the speeds down to 40 as much as possible around the intersection during that time, because there is a lot of school kids and parents using it.
Yeah. Great.
Yeah,
okay.
That was everything.
Yeah, you've done well there. Certainly another prize coming, going up to Brisbane. So because that's it's a really nice analysis of a signalised intersection. I mean, there's a huge amount of other sort of stuff that we could work through associated, with buses and different, lines of sight to different signals, lighting, all sorts of stuff, and then pedestrian desire lines and list goes on. But the ones you've done are really good. They're meaty. They're correctly categorized. I suppose the speed limit reductions are good, and they're going to influence both the likelihood and severity of crashes. I, really would be encouraging these sort of intersections to be raised. It's not common practice in Queensland at this stage. I think there's more and more interest in it and more looking at it. It's going to be a little bit more problematic with the downhill and trying to raise that. But fundamentally, that slowing of people through these sorts of intersections with some physical treatment, that they were slow on the approach to it. It's not like we're talking big urban speed hump type arrangement. A shallow raised platform, slow them down just through, and then they would continue on their journey. We could do it at thousands of intersections in Brisbane. Why would we pick this one? Well, you might. We've got to start somewhere, I suppose, and we're having a look at it. But yeah, a fair bit to do there. It's interesting. It's got speed cameras, red light cameras. So they're good ones to reduce the likelihood of crashes as well. But yeah, thinking about how we can further manage speed would be, in an ideal world, a good thing. Well done. That was excellent. So we had two really good ones there. Thank you very much. I'll drop Cohen off. Thanks again, Cohen. Do we have any questions or comments in there, Marissa?
We have a comment from Jess. Just to make it more interesting, TMR has both Old Cleveland Road and Cavendish Road mapped as a principal cycle network. Wow.
Okay. So interesting point there, and thank you, Jess. That is very interesting. I'll talk to you a little bit more about this later, but before you get into do a safe system assessment, you do a bit of information gathering and understanding what's the context of the project, what's the context of the area, what's the land use, what's the movement in place categorization, what's the, is it on a principal bike network? Is it a pedestrian priority area, public transport, and these sort of things? So once you've got that information, it factors into your assessment. It may or may not factor into the scoring, which we'll get to next module, but it certainly would factor into any recommendations you're making associated with that. And just by Jess sharing that knowledge with me there, I'd say, well, now when I'm thinking about exposure and likelihood and severity, there's a lot more focus in trying to really get some of those cycling facilities improved on these locations, rather than doing things to encourage cyclists to a parallel principal cycle route. Very interesting. Thank you, everybody. That's great. We got great input, and look, we're already sort of 40 minutes into the session, but I'm okay with that because looking at real world sites and just talking through how we look at risk through exposure and likelihood and severity is essentially what a safe system assessment is. I'm going to just give you a few little tools to formalize that into some scoring and the like. Okay. Should I get into some content, Marissa?
Absolutely. Let's go.
And I'll let everybody have a break in 20 minutes or so. But I do certainly have some content for today's session that I've got to get through. And sharing my screen now.
Up and running.
So today's session is about vulnerable road users. But before I do that, I do want to clarify something that we've seen in a couple of the assignments coming through. And it's a very common challenge in getting your head around exposure, likelihood, and severity. Generally people are pretty good at the likelihood. And severity, yeah, the severity and likelihood seem to be good. Exposure does trap a few people. And so let me just clarify a little bit on exposure. And I mentioned it when I was talking there earlier. Just think about exposure as number of vehicles, number of cyclists, number of motorcyclists, number of pedestrians crossing or that could be involved in a crash at that location. That's how I want you to think about it. I showed in module 1 these sort of treatments that influence exposure, blocking off an intersection completely, so there's no vehicles exposed to it, or complete separation. So again, there's no vehicle to vulnerable road user conflict are examples of exposure. But a sort of little definition, exposure in a safe system assessment, this refers to which road users in what numbers are using the road and are thus exposed to a potential crash. This might include AADT, so annual average daily traffic, side road traffic volumes, number of motorcyclists, number of cyclists, number of pedestrians walking along or crossing the road. So let me give you one example that trips people up a little bit off. So if you've got a road and you've got pedestrians crossing, and maybe it's a bit on a pedestrian desire line, they cross the road there. The number of pedestrians crossing there, that's our exposure to pedestrian crashes. If you do a curb outstand or a curb build out, depending on where you come from, what you would call it. So you've done this curb outstand, curb build out. You've lessened the distance that they need to cross, but you have not changed the number. So you're not changing the exposure. So exposure is still the same, but the likelihood of crashes probably come down because they're, in better sight lines to vehicles, on the road for less distance. Now, the reason that trips some people up is because sort of previously in road safety, we'd probably talk about that as an exposure, like they're exposed for less time or less distance. But in a safe system assessment, just think about those numbers. It's about the number of people crossing. So hopefully that's helped clarify a little bit in some people's mind. But happy to answer further questions anybody might have on that. So Austroads has the Safe System Assessment Framework, which we are sort of going through. I haven't overtly told you about how we're going through it, but we are in the last few modules we've been going through it. We'll go through a bit more, and then I'll give you some of the specifics around scoring and the like. But there are some gaps in what Austroads produced, and there's some gaps in what jurisdictions have produced after. We tried to sort of fill the gaps with some of these fact sheets on particular scoring techniques, how you categorize into exposure and likelihood and severity for some things. So I'll provide you with those. In fact, I think we've already provided them as a link in the resources that you can get these. Probably going to be a bit more relevant after next module once you're into starting to score things and trying to get your head around that. But I'll point those out to you. For this module, we want to have a think about movement in place or link in place or any sort of strategic planning frameworks, and think about how that links with safe system thinking. We're going to talk about vulnerable road users, and those are pedestrian, cyclists, motorcyclists, and think about how we create safe system environments or get us well aligned with safe system principles for these particular road users. And we're going to look at, obviously, key risk factors for those road users and categorizing them, as we always do, into exposure, likelihood, and severity. Don't forget to count your wallies. So movement in place is a fairly common way to think about a road and street network from a strategic planning sense. It's used in most jurisdictions. Certainly Austroads has good documentation on it. The concept really, I like to use this sort of old Sydney road planning framework diagram to explain movement in place, because it does it fairly simplistically, which is about all we need. Well, in a safe system assessment sense. What we've got here is movement on the y-axis. So this is saying a road or a street may play a movement function. It's trying to move people or goods through that area. But the x-axis says, but it can also play an important place function. And a place function is an area for people to congregate, to trade, to interact, to socialize, to hang out, have a coffee, have, a market, sell stuff. That's all of that sort of stuff. And a street or a road has sometimes a really important place value to our community. Now, roads and streets originated as movement function, but as we built up around them and then we started to build community around this, place value is there. And this is an acknowledgement of that. Now, first thing I want to say is that when I talk about movement, or anybody talks about movement in place, it is not talking about just vehicle numbers. It is movement of people and goods, which could be a cycle corridor. It could be a vehicle corridor, like a motorway, or it could be, it could be a walking corridor for that matter. It's about movement of people and goods. The easiest example up there, which has only movement characteristics and strategic objectives, is a motorway. There is no place value to a motorway. You do not want your community hanging out there and trading and the like, and you'll actively deter that. Down the other end, we've got these sort of places for people, as they called it in this framework, or these ones where it's really all about a place to hang out, to trade, to interact, to have a coffee, have a beer or whatever. And it's not about moving people or goods through there at any sort of pace. Maybe you have a little bit of a requirement of that, but it's really not the function of that street or that road. And then you can obviously see there, you start to try to categorize any area into what is its movement of place characteristics, Or, what are you aspiring to? Where are you trying to get this bit of street or road to? So why is this important within a safe system assessment? Well, it is not important in terms of assessing an existing road or a design, because that's simply what are the physical characteristics of this road from a death and serious injury potential perspective. It doesn't matter what somebody labeled it, if they labeled it a local street, a vibrant street, a motorway, because you're just looking at the physical characteristics of the road and the environment and these sort of things. Where this comes into play in a safe system assessment is that you are going to be asked to help the project team or the road authority to get better alignment with safe system principles. What are some ideas that they could put into play to alter the infrastructure or the operations to get a better safe system alignment? And you can do this with all sorts of different tools out of the toolkit. Like, we can do barrier systems, we can do overpasses, we can lower speeds, we can do roundabouts, we can do pedestrian crossings, we can do shared zones, we can do all sorts of things out there. I could list things all day. But what each of these will do is push you in different ways within a movement and place context. So, you might, I'll go with extreme examples. So we can get motorways to operate very, very safely by making them 30, 40 kilometers per hour, but through different means. But you've lost its function. Same down here. We can get these local urban streets operating very safely by putting big barrier systems down the side of the road, stopping pedestrians crossing anywhere, building overpasses, so there's no conflict points and the like. But you've eroded all of the place value of that area. Okay, both giving us high alignment with safe system principles, but not thinking about how we actually want to operate our transport system and road system. So that's where you're tailoring your recommendations based on the strategic objectives of that road, based on some sort of planning framework. So COVID was an interesting sort of, it took a whole lot of areas that people wanted to have more place value, and then they just started popping in infrastructure to make it more place value, which was a sort of fascinating, quick way to watch movement and place play out, which was good. But let's say we're in a category right down here. We've identified that an area is, we aspire to have high place value for this street. It's got low movement strategic function. And here it is, very artistic impression. So you take all of this with a grain of salt, but here it is now. And what I think I'll get you to do is have a couple of minutes to think about what could you change in this road environment, this hypothetical road environment, that would increase alignment with safe system principles, so make it safer, but is also going to promote a sense of place for this street. And then, of course, I'm going to get you to categorize it into exposure or likelihood or severity or a combination. So I don't know, you might type into the chat something like, I'll go something that's not relevant at all. Improving the lighting. Okay, improve lighting, and you'd write likelihood. We'll put an L next to it. Now that's probably not going to have any influence on, well, we don't know what the lighting really is. We can see some lights, and from a movement and place perspective, it's a bit either way. But what I want you to do is think of things you could do that would make it more of a place, better alignment with safe system principles, and then keep practicing your categorization. So I'll give you a minute and a half to have a think about that. We'll do this one. We might have a look at another one, and then I'll give you that break that I promised you. Okay. So we're getting some really good ideas coming in here. So thank you. So we had some ideas to sort of assist pedestrians crossing with dedicated crossing points and the like. And that's certainly going to improve safe system alignment because we'll have more visibility at crossing points and potentially we can slow vehicles at those locations. There is, to a degree, I mean, if you have a dedicated crossing point, you've immediately moved out of heavy place thinking, because that a dedicated crossing point, it says this is a road to move cars and pedestrians, you know, that's your area to cross. Okay, so as you build up a movement requirement, that's when you start moving into those categories. But I think that you know, early on there we saw Joseph say close the road. That's a great starting point for anything that you've said. This is high place, low movement. That's the question to ask. Can we just close the road? You eliminate exposure to crashes. You get huge place value out of the area by removing vehicles out of that location. So certainly a great place to start. So prize there for Joseph on starting there. And others are really doing good things in, but a lot of the other ones are coming in further up once you push up on movement requirements through an area. So things like line marking, bike lanes, anything like that it's more movement orientated. I started right down in the absolute place area. Shared zones are very good. I mean, they're really place orientated. Again, they do have some small movement characteristics, but I really do love the idea of a shared zone, highly place valued. I think Catherine was in there as well with removed vehicles, so another prize there. It's really, the removal of vehicles is exposure. I mean, we've eliminated exposure to crashes because the vehicles are out of there. I mean, there might be some little residual exposure, bikes to pedestrians that you can deal with. But then as we sort of elevate the requirement there for movement, of people and goods through the area in different modes is where we start to get into some of these other really wonderful ideas that people are coming up with: raised crossing treatments, dedicated crossing points, widening the footpaths, so narrowing the road down, which will influence the speed of vehicles. It will also influence, less crossing distance, so lessening the likelihood of crashes there. And all of this is about sort of bringing some speeds down as well. So again, artistic impression there. You can see immediately, you can see it's going to be a better place, isn't it? It's got that place feel to it, those place characteristics. It's going to be safer. The speed's very low for vehicles going through there. I don't particularly think they need that crossing point in this little artistic venture they've gone down. I mean, shared zone the whole area. It's a very much, people should be able to permeate and cross and interact through these areas anywhere. And that's part of placemaking. As you build, as I said, as you go up that y-axis of movement requirement for people and goods is where you start to then separate and create these dedicated crossing points and separated cycle facilities and bus lanes and the like. And you can still see here we're retaining pretty great place characteristics, but we also got some reasonable movement of people and goods through there, on bikes and in buses and some cars, and pedestrians being able to move through the area as well. So local streets we tend to talk about as having low place, low movement function. You don't tell the residents we think that their streets is low place value. It's more that societal definition of place where it's got more going on. But what that facilitates is our ability to take some of those characteristics we were talking about just there with lower speeds, lower access, like removing the ability to rat run through areas, local area traffic management, bringing speeds down. And it's all about the fact that we don't have big movement requirements through an area. So as soon as you're able to gather that information that this is sort of in that local street environment, speeds significantly down and what, getting speeds down one way or another, as we talked about earlier, through physical treatments, through speed limits, through other measures, is really where we would be looking, because that's going to facilitate high alignment with safe system principles. And it's not coming at the cost of something that anybody's recognized as a strategic priority in the area. So again, we see these sort of cartoony style images. This is quite a residential street, but again, slowing vehicles, and you happen to get much more place value out of this, but that's not specifically the requirement. You can facilitate that safety from it. Now let's go into a hard category, and it's a category that immediately, if I was doing a safe system assessment and I was talking to them about, well, what's your objective with this area? What categorization have you got in movement and place? And they said, oh, it's high movement, high place. I'd say, oh, can you give me something to work with here? Because that's very hard for us to do, to have an area that has all of these wonderful place characteristics, but also has heavy movement of people and goods through an area. It can be done, but it takes some a little bit of different thinking. So I asked them, okay, can you give me a bit? Can you move me down one way or another to help? But let's have a think about that. So this one, I'm going to give you 5 minutes. It's also going to be your opportunity to fill up your coffee and to have a stretch. But we're going to do the same exercise, thinking about this in this sort of vibrant streets categorization up here, where we've still got high place value we're aspiring for. We want this to be a place where people want to hang out and trade and interact, and it's all nice and that. But we've also got this movement requirement of people and goods through this area, through this road and this road environment. So you can see it here. It's got a 70km/h speed limit. It's got lots of vehicles going through there, lots of lanes. It's got a pedestrian overpass. It's got fencing. What would you change to make this high place value and high movement through the area? And again, categorize them into exposure and likelihood and severity. So I'm going to give you 5 minutes on that. And as I say, take a break, take a stretch, maybe do that, ponder what you might do in this, and then type it into the chat, and we'll get back into it. Seeing lots of good ideas coming in here. Okay. So some really good thinking coming into play here. I'm just going to run through, again, I'll pick a few of them. I probably won't get to everybody's. We started off with some ideas to reduce the speed of vehicles through the area. And that's certainly going to be fundamentally important to ensuring our place characteristics at a location like this in its general form. So a prize there for NISAT. And separating facilities or road users and having them their own areas and spaces, that's got some good ability to foster movement and can help us with that movement and place characteristics. Now, we've got a couple of interesting ones here, which I think I always like people innovatively thinking or putting out their ideas. So Glenn said, well, you didn't give us a budget. All right, I'm going to dig down, I'm going to cut and cover and put all the vehicles down and have this wonderful place area on top. Great idea. That's beautiful. I mean, it sort of creates two environments, a place environment and a movement environment. But I love the thinking, and certainly if you had the money, that's how you're going to get beautiful outcomes. So let's give Glenn a prize for being an innovative thinker there. Then we get into this interesting point where we've got some people saying, well, let's stop pedestrians crossing on the road. Let's fence them off and let's put them into the overpass and push them out there. And then we've got some people saying, well, no, hang on, let's get rid of those fences and let's let pedestrians cross and permeate through this area. And really, when we have said high place requirement, we've absolutely sort of locked ourselves into saying we need to have pedestrians be able to cross and permeate and move around this area. So just because we said high place means that I would be opting more towards getting rid of pedestrian overpasses, getting rid of these fences and the like, and creating these environments where crossing can happen in lots of locations. And you're going to try and balance that with getting vehicles through there. But you can't have this place value where you corral pedestrians and block fences, put fences off to block them and force them in there, and they got to walk up the stairs and then they got to go across. That's not a place for people. That's a movement corridor dominated characteristic way of thinking. And I think Alan's sort of put that well in his one, talking about creating these crossing points for people and reducing the likelihood and severity of crashes from that perspective. So prize there for Alan on picking up that important movement requirements still sat in there. The other things that I'm seeing in some of the ones getting them moving around, they're good from a safe system perspective, but they more align when we get to the next category, which is your movement corridor. So you're saying, no, this is about moving, it could be vehicles or it could be cyclists, moving them through. Don't do anything to slow anybody down or get in the way. And we don't particularly care that pedestrians aren't having the best time ever hanging out, having a coffee there. That's not what we want them to do in this area. So yeah, good ideas on separation. I'm reading a longer one here. Yeah. Yep. So people often comment about like the pedestrian overpass not sort of being something that's accessible for all road users, so people in wheelchairs and vision impaired. And it's a really important point to think about. I mean, again, as I say, for this particular one, we're thinking more about getting rid of that type of stuff because it's heavily movement orientated. But certainly if you are in a movement corridor and you've decided to do these sort of things, we want to make sure everybody in the community can use them. And I think we've got good assessment techniques and good sort of DDA compliance and techniques to ensure that sort of stuff would happen. Okay, let's have a look, sort of artistic impression again. And yeah, it same sort of corridor in terms of width of corridor, cross section is very different. Widened footpaths and big sort of cycle facilities and public transport facilities, and has vehicles through there. So a lot of people often revert their thinking to just pushing vehicles through as a movement, but we are thinking about public transport, thinking about cycling with, and it provides that movement through. Again, like the speeds of vehicles and linking that directly to movement is applicable in your motorway context and maybe a major traffic route context. But when you're in these sorts of environments, these high speeds of cars through there is a somewhat meaningless thing to be doing. It's meaningless because, well, first of all, in urban environments, speed limit is a pretty low influence on travel time or anything like that. It's about the signals and the phasing and the congestion. That's what's influencing, and not the speed limit itself. There's some really good sort of studies around showing hardly influences all 40, 50, 60. It's going to take people the same time to get through an area anyway. If in a car, from that sense, and it's just a much safer environment if we're able to do that, where we have these lower speeds. So people then sometimes say, well, if it's going to be slow anyway, why we bother lowering the speed limit? Well, it's about those peaks at mid blocks and the occasional things that are popping over. We want to smooth out some of those extremes, and that creates an environment that's gonna be safer. So you can see there the separation reduces the likelihood of cyclist crashes. I'd still say that we have potential for cyclist crashes at those intersections, but the intersections are going to be slowed and they have good characteristics in reducing the likelihood of crashes there. The severity will be down as well. So, artistic impression again, take it all with a grain of salt. And sometimes it's very hard for us with our existing road environment to have a leap into something like this because it's so far sometimes from what we have done with a road. But you do sometimes when you're doing it piece by piece. Sometimes maybe somebody visionary has a long-term vision like this and they're able to then start chipping away at it. But we do see this sort of stuff happening, maybe not as sort of overtly as these artistic impressions, but we're starting to see separated cycle lanes come into areas. We're seeing protected intersections like this one. We're seeing bike facilities come in like this one. For something like this, I would talk about it as a reduction in the likelihood of bike crashes. So beforehand, if bikes were going in, say, their own lane, like a bike lane, or they were mixing with traffic from that perspective, to this, I would say, is a reduction in the likelihood of crashes, not exposure, because there's still the ability for a vehicle to leave their lane, get in there, or all of the turns in and out from side roads and access points. But certainly at some point of separation in these sort of Copenhagen-style facilities, I would revert that to saying we don't have the exposure anymore. But not on this one. It's not far enough away. It's not physically separated. It's got too much access for vehicles coming in and out. 4 meter ticket over to a change of exposure. And we talked a bit about the movement corridors. Okay, so you find yourself in these movement, if you found it in a movement corridor, it could be a traffic priority route. It could be a cycleway only. You're going to try to do things to keep vehicle speeds up, keep cyclist speed up, keep car speed up, keep truck speed up, whatever it is. And you're going to then be in positions to start to actively stop pedestrians crossing at points, creating pedestrian overpasses and the like, and really not making it a place to hang out, a place to, that's particularly nice to hang out and to trade and all of those things. You still, within that, want to be thinking about tolerance to physical force, crashes that can still occur. And so sort of these intersections, as I showed you last module, I mean, these are big traffic priority routes, they're movement corridors, and yet still you want to bring speeds down at these conflict points because the crashes will still happen. So cyclists and pedestrians as vulnerable road users, obviously very vulnerable to that physical force, sort of 10% serious injury risk at around a 20 km/h hit, and pretty much almost certain death at direct 50 km/h hits. Young and old, even more vulnerable for slightly different reasons. Old people, very frail, small amount of force creates catastrophic injury often. Young people actually absorb a huge amount of force and are very resilient to the physical damage and recover quite well, better than a lot of adults and certainly much better than old people. The challenge with young is associated with biomechanics of crash injury, often in where they get hit, heads closer to harder parts of vehicles, and overrun as opposed to underrun. So pedestrian being struck in a lot of scenarios will be put onto the bonnet and somehow go over the vehicle, whereas smaller is more chance of the vehicle running over the pedestrian, and so that's why we see, I suppose, more severity of injury for young people in crashes as well. So I mean, the end result is we're particularly sensitive around young and old people and pedestrians, and but we really need to be thinking about this for all pedestrians. And we want to try and really manage speeds down where we know we have that pedestrian activity, and through our traffic calming features, through infrastructure and speed limits and bringing those speeds down. We have to do it from the physics and the biomechanics of injury, the amount of force that people can take in these incidents, and we will see these crashes happen and mistakes happen. Pedestrians make mistakes, drivers make mistakes, so everything that has to be done at that lower speed. So separated facilities are really wonderful from that perspective, because we can separate, we can have vehicles going at a bit of higher speed, separated away from our vulnerable road users. And we know these Copenhagen style treatments are becoming more and more popular and accepted, and they do a pretty good job in that safe system alignment. And certainly roundabouts, we talked about there, wonderful characteristics in last module in terms of vehicle-to-vehicle crashes in higher speed environments, and even in disrupting priority in your medium speed environments, and ensuring that all vehicles are alert at intersections and conflict points. Pedestrians and cyclists have always had challenges at roundabouts. The research around this shows that cyclists are far more vulnerable to injury, and there's more crashes for cyclists at roundabouts. For pedestrians, the research is not as definitive as it is for cyclists. A lot of it comes down to this being a blocker to people walking, essentially. People won't walk, or they won't cross roads at roundabouts without really good crossing facilities with pedestrian priority. So but from a just death and serious injury perspective, there's not great evidence to show that roundabouts are more unsafe for pedestrians than signalized or non-priority, or just passively controlled intersections like giveaway sign and the like. But as I say, from that perspective of if you want your community to be walking, then a roundabout is certainly a big blocker to that actually happening. But we have these sorts of facilities, which I'm showing on screen as an available option. And we're really seeing an absolute explosion of this sort of thinking around Australia at the moment in terms of roundabouts in urban environments having pedestrian and cyclist priority facilities around the roundabout. So it could be just your wombat crossings on different legs, or you might have this extra cycle facility and more a Dutch style roundabout where, you know, if a bike rider comes in, they want to go right, they can sort of come in here and they go all the way around and they go that way. But certainly we know this ticks the boxes in terms of reduction in the likelihood of crashes for pedestrians, for cyclists, and a reduction in the severity of crashes for pedestrians and cyclists. And you get all of that benefit for passenger vehicles as well. It's just a wonderful, ticks all of those boxes. What are the downsides to it? I mean, here's that one actually built. It's not, these aren't just concepts. We're seeing these starting to roll out. Lots of them happening across Melbourne. Queensland's got them popping up, and New Zealand's going gangbusters on this sort of thinking. I mean, the impact this has on vehicles is there in terms of traffic flow, but that is an absolute exception. Like it's accepted because of the movement of place characteristics and the priority road users in these locations. So this one's down to sit at Port Phillip, and as I understand, there's a sort of some standard words floating around that basically if vehicle drivers, car drivers say, I get stuck in this area now, the standard words say something along the line of, Port Phillip's strategic priority is to get people walking and cycling, and we're providing priority in these locations for pedestrians and cyclists, and we encourage you to consider walking and cycling in the future as your mode of transport, if you can possibly do so. I haven't actually seen it, but I thought that's just beautiful, isn't it? It's actually taking strategic objectives and making those calls on the ground. Because far too often it's that, we want to do everything. We want it to be, really fast moving for vehicles through the area, and also safe for pedestrians and safe for cyclists, and encouraging walkers and the like. And it's near impossible to get everything like that, and you need to start prioritizing. But there are some little tricks on the details of design of these, and it's not the point of this course to go into detailed design on these sort of facilities or the like. But just a few quick tips: get your setback at 4 meters if you possibly can. That gives two advantages. One being that vehicles, or most vehicles, then can, get up to here, make the next move, prop there, not propped on the crossing point, Okay, some have a trailer or you know, a truck there, but the bulk can do that, and you can leave that sort of nice gap. Also, then as this vehicle comes around, they can prop there, and you can still have other vehicles sort of, you know, slowly go through. So there's a couple of good little tips to have a think about. There's plenty of like design specifics associated with these, and happy to share information on that with anybody who's grappling with that. Oh, thank you. We're back. Okay, so the 2-lane roundabouts, highly problematic to navigate pedestrians and cyclists through, and you know, there's concepts floating around to try to get Dutch style roundabouts, but so in these scenarios, you're trying to really, you'd want to go under at these locations or over if you possibly could. I mean, the idea of trying to get pedestrians to cross multi-lanes and cyclists is going to be a serious impediment to them actually crossing at these locations and the like. Plus, you've got this challenge associated with the safety, the dynamic visual obstruction. So by dynamic visual obstruction, I sort of mean you've got vehicles coming through, and then, you know, you've got another vehicle tailing behind it, masking vision, and it's very, very challenging. I don't have great answers. I mean, the Dutch wouldn't even dream of trying to have pedestrians or cyclists crossing multi-lane roundabouts like this. It'd definitely be underneath and the like. We need to, I think, sort of progress to that. At the moment, it's very much associated with reducing the likelihood of crashes. But as a bit of a general concept, an adaptation of a Dutch diagram, you know, low speed, you know, sharing of road space is generally, you know, aligned with safe system principles, because the forces mean that when crashes happen, they're not going to be past tolerable levels. But as you're beyond about 30 kilometers an hour at sort of your highest, you need to physically separate with either Copenhagen-style lanes, pushing parking out, providing bike facilities, or physical curb separators. And then pushing up anywhere around sort of 70 is where you want to actually have well physically separated shared path or cycleway facilities off-road. Now, pedestrians, and do keep your questions coming in if anybody's got questions. Pedestrians, I can make this fairly short. The idea of a pedestrian crossing, like a zebra crossing without raised features, I just want to tell people that is not a road safety feature. A pedestrian crossing without raised features. So you're seeing raised features there. That's a New Zealand one. Let's look at an Australian one. If you just have a zebra crossing without that raised part to make it a wombat crossing, it's not a road safety treatment. Okay, it might encourage people to walk and the like, but we get the high speed of vehicles and pedestrians who have priority and walk out with less looking. And so if incidents do occur, the severity is very high. We might have a few less, but the severity is very high. So if you're at any point and you're providing priority crossings for pedestrians, you've got to ask yourself the question as to why are we not slowing vehicles down at this location? We've identified it's a crossing point. They're a vulnerable road user, and we really have to get our mindset into that, saying, well, we need to address that severity. The raising of a zebra crossing to make it a wombat crossing, we call it, make it a wombat crossing, makes it about a 70% reduction in death and serious injury for pedestrians. It's astronomically large reduction. It's so good. These are a wonderful feature from the perspective of vehicles slow down. They're more likely to stop. as a result of this, because they got their foot on the brake. They're already slowing down. Pedestrians are in an elevated spot. They can be seen better. It's better for people in wheelchairs and vision impaired people and old people as well. That's just a spin-off advantage. But certainly those vehicles slow down. And when incidents do occur, they're very low speed. So from a safe system assessment perspective, these are getting big reductions in risk scores. And really, as you're making recommendations, if you're seeing pedestrians crossing at a point, or it's a formalized pedestrian crossing, or even areas where pedestrians are crossing, the addition of raised features and raised priority crossings is just a wonderful alignment with safe system principles. But I think we've known for a long time what a safe system is for pedestrians. But let me just explain it with this little story. This is in Adelaide, quite a little fair while back, but this is a 60-kilometre-per-hour road. And there are these people doing work in the island here, down here, doing electrical works and some other bits and pieces. And because the couple of workers were in there for a week or so, that went down to 25 kilometres an hour. That just happens to be the South Australian work zone speed limit. We would probably have made it 40, but in the other states. But okay, so going down to 25. They put the barriers up. Anyway, those workers work for a couple of weeks, or a week and a half, or whatever it was, finish their work. All the barriers are removed, goes back up to 60, and like 3,000 pedestrians a day stand right in those spots that the workers were. Same vulnerability to injury, but for some reason we say for a worker, it's unacceptable to be exposed to those forces and that risk, but for the general public, you're on your own, protect yourself. And people might say, but the workers are concentrating on their work and they're not, looking at the pedestrians are concentrating on their phone, or they're intoxicated, or, all sorts of things going on. So it's more just that mentality of safety is utmost priority for work, but not for the general public. And so I would say just take that general philosophy of safety culture from workplace, apply it to the public road network, and would be very well aligned with safe system principles if we were able to do that. I understand all of the complications and evolution of where we're at, and social norms and all of that stuff, but it's just fascinating to see. Public transport is something that it basically doubles your likelihood of crash. Any public transport spot, be it a light rail tram stop, a bus stop, a train station, when the tram is coming, pedestrians just take risk. They run for it, they'll dart across multi-lanes, they'll do all that. So factoring that into your safe system assessment, and you will, when you're safe system assessing, no doubt, look at spots that have public transport corridors, and just think about that, the increased risk-taking activity associated with when that vehicle is coming. And you can then start to factor that into your scoring, and factor that into some of the recommendations you make around the importance of lowering speeds either at these crossing points or when public transport is arriving. We know that's the point of time of risk. But raised intersections, I keep banging on about it, but they're just great from the sense of they reduce the likelihood and the severity of crashes. Some little, again, design tricks and tips. You don't really have a curb anymore. So there is a lot of potential for a vehicle to run over these areas. So something like these bollards become an important little design characteristic to keep vehicles out there and ensure any tracking isn't over those areas where pedestrians could be storing. Also, things like raised threshold treatments are great. Need to spend long on that. Speed limits we talked about. Speed limits are effective in reducing the likelihood and severity of crashes. Here's just one to sort of show it from quite a while back, but this is when the default speed limit went from 60 to 50. And you can see step change sort of type reductions in death and serious injury. A few slides on motorcyclists to ensure that we've covered off all of the different road users in our thinking, because next module, when you're being told, okay, this is how you document stuff in an assessment, and this is where you put things, you're going to need to think about cyclists, motorcyclists, pedestrians, vehicles, and it's a very methodical work through different road users. So motorcyclists, they're going to be one of the most challenging road users to sort of provide safe system environments for, due to speed and vulnerability. And I talk about the 5 S's of motorcycle safety in terms of what we design and manage from the road perspective: sight, surface, signs, strike, and speed. So can motorcyclists be seen? Are we providing surfaces that assist in keeping traction? Have we got signs to warn, inform, guide? What is going to be hit during a crash event, and what speed is all of this happening? So the signs, the sight, surface, and signs are all about reducing the likelihood of crash, trying to stop crashes happening in the first place. Strike is associated with severity, because crash is happening. How bad is it going to be? And the speed influences both the likelihood and severity of crashes. I mean, that's one of the reasons speed is such a powerful tool in our road safety toolkit. If we can alter speeds in any way of vehicles, be that motorcyclists or passenger vehicles, we see massive reductions in the chance and severity of crashes. So motorcyclists, there's been a bit of more recent research into biomechanics of injury of motorcyclists, how much force motorcyclists can handle. Previously, we just sort of said, we'll just say that they're the same as pedestrians and cyclists. And the research showed they were a bit up from pedestrians and cyclists in terms of the forces they can handle in crash types. They were certainly down from what vehicles can handle in terms of crash types. So even with helmets and body armor and those sorts of things, we still see motorcyclists far more vulnerable than cars. But there's a few curves in your notes and a link to that reference to that research if you want to delve into that in much more detail. But motorcyclists are small. They're hidden behind things like trees, and you can see the motorcyclist there hidden behind the tree. These are influencing the chance of crash. They're a bit more likely to be involved in a crash at an intersection because of the fact they're smaller, they're harder to see. The surface is a super important part of the road environment for motorcyclists beyond any other road user. Cyclists' surface is important too, but motorcyclists are just going at higher speed. They lean a fair bit. You can see there the center of gravity is out. The forces are there. That means that any surface deficiencies are problematic for riders. And that can include stuff that's been put in the road, like steel plates and things that make it slippery. If I was at night and maybe a bit of little bit of rain, a little bit of moisture on that. It's very slippery surface. The rider may be following behind other vehicles, not see it. And we're increasing the likelihood of crash by some of these surface features that we've put into play. And you'd be assessing that as a safe system assessor. Signs. So motorcyclists highly attuned to signage, and our general signage, getting that correct is important. It helps us give messages to motorcyclists who are attuned to signage. There are particular motorcycle warning signs like the one I just put up there if you want to talk particularly to a motorcyclist, but motorcyclists are very aware of signage. So we do have some good levers in terms of the likelihood of crashes for motorcyclists by using good signage and good warning and informing of what's coming up. The strike, I pointed you at the latest research on biomechanics of injury there for motorcycle riders. The severity of crash outcome we're dealing with here. So I'll use the European crash test protocol for motorcycle into barrier. You basically get a crash test dummy, and then you put it in leathers, and well, you weld its thumbs and do a few other little bits and pieces, but you slide it at a barrier at 60 kilometers per hour. And hopefully that's streaming through, but you can see at 60 kilometers per hour into a post, that's enough force to kill the rider. But if you're able to put that sort of underrun protection in there, redirect some of that energy, it's within survivable, in the sort of survivable envelope in terms of the forces that's been put onto that rider. Now, it's not going to be a friendly thing for the rider. That's happening at 60 kilometers an hour. We really don't have a lot when you're up at 80 kilometers an hour or so. It becomes very hard unless you're building things like, Grand Prix tracks and huge run out areas and sand traps and the like. But there is hope that for some areas we can reduce the severity of crashes by transferring energy and absorbing energy. So we don't want to forget about that. Speed, as I mentioned, so critical in road safety, but can be achieved through advisory speeds like you see there, or regulatory speed limit reductions, or local area traffic management, or other physical measures to reduce speed. And it's going to influence both the likelihood and severity of crashes for all road users. Motorcyclists also get some really good benefits. Mind you, when we're talking about like 100 kilometer per hour route, and if we talked about a speed limit reduction to an 80 kilometer per hour route, when you do a safe system assessment on that, you'll discover that, yes, you're going to get reduction for motorcyclists in the likelihood of crashes by bringing speeds from, say, around 100 to around 80 of operating speeds for motorcyclists. The severity is maxed out in both scenarios. It's beyond what is tolerable. Okay, so just be aware of that sort of limitation as well. You'll see next module, we'll talk about putting scores to the severity. I mean, it's a 4. A 4 is our maximum score. It's a 4 at 100. It's a 4 at 80. Motorcyclists crashing at 100 or 80, it is going to result in death. Direct strikes into anything solid. You may be able to do some tweaking with barrier systems to bring that down a little bit, but it's very, very challenging just on the biomechanics of it. I don't think I'll do that quiz. I think I'll give people a bit of time back instead and let them finish off their actual quiz, because there is a quiz at the end of this module, so which we're going to finish shortly. So I want you to get in there and do that. And I know there's a couple of people who are just dragging their heels a little bit on the assignment, and I want that done and the other quiz done, because the end of next module, we're giving you a bigger assignment and it's going to take up a bit more time. And so I'd prefer everybody to be at a point they've done the assignment too. They've got some feedback on that. So they're calibrating their thinking in terms of exposure, likelihood and severity, got their quizzes done, ready to go into the into the mock safe system assessment we're going to get you to do. Anything I missed, Marissa?
No, but I'm just seeing a black screen. Hopefully that's just me. Can you see me, Ken?
I can see you. Yep. Oh, okay. Good. Yep.
I can't see you, but I'm just seeing a black screen, but that's okay. Hopefully that's just me. If it's anyone else, please yell out. Did you want me to, I'll share my screen and show the LMS just to go over where to find the quiz if you like. Hopefully that works because it looks like I've got a few bugs on my end. Can you see my screen?
Yep.
Yeah, okay. So just in the LMS, everybody, under module 3 for today's session, we have quite a few resources there that Ken has probably mentioned throughout today's session that you're welcome to just have a browse through. We do have the presentation there, and we have our module 3 quiz just there for you to complete. So yeah, like we've left you a little bit of time for you to jump in and complete that. So hopefully you get a chance. And in the resources folder, we also have those fact sheets that Ken referred to here at the start of the session. So feel free to browse through all of that. Yeah, and there's no other assignments for the day. So hopefully I haven't missed anything there, Ken.
No, that's good. Let's let everybody go and get stuck into it. Thanks, Marissa, and
Thank you.
keep in contact if you've got any questions, everybody. But see you a few minutes before the next session, and we'll go from there. Yes, you can resubmit your assignment too. If you have any troubles with that, just email through to training@safesystemsolutions.com.au, and they'll help you with that.
Great. Thanks, everyone.
Bye.